And at the age of 23, with no design training, no business training, the common sense of the small pony, I started Paul Lafrance Design, which was cutting edge construction and design at the time, and that's the company. That's the company that we grew and defied every single law of I didn't have any business training, so I didn't know that. I didn't know that you're supposed to wear like a golf shirt with like a company insignia on the side. I didn't know that you're supposed to be like friendly but not familiar with your clients. I didn't know these business rules. So, I would walk up to the door wearing the same clothes that people would recognize me wearing on TV, because that was me. I was the same guy. Looked like I just walked off stage, walking into somebody's house, and within 5 seconds, I would be asking very inappropriate questions like, tell me who you are, tell me your hopes, your dreams, your fears, and what's funny is that the vast majority of people loved that I asked those questions. It was very, very few people that called the police.
Welcome to the Secrets of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Keis. Well, today's show is a little bit different in some ways, but in other ways just the same as we always do, where we have a compelling and amazing story. But today's guest is a TV star from HGTV here in North America, which is Home and Garden Television. Now, his shows that he's had on for almost a decade, actually recently he's been on a couple of them as well. And so we have Paul Lafrance as a guest. Now, Paul was the host of a show called Decked Out, where I got to know him, and then there were other shows that went. So there was another one recently called Home to Win, which is where HGTV selects a house and redoes it, and then that allows you to kind of give the house away. And now what he's done is created his own show called BackyardRevolutionTV.com. Now, the interesting thing about this interview is Paul's story of not finishing high school, of finding out later on in life that he has some ADHD elements, and he actually calls it interest deficit, not attention deficit, and what that's meant to him, and then how he came to getting his own TV shows, several of them actually on HGTV, that were then licensed all around the world, to the UK, to Australia, to South Africa. So some of you from the different countries that are listening to this would have mentioned that. And it really is just the power of story. But one of the other things that Paul really talks about is being authentic. He never fit in high school. People really just didn't appreciate the fact that he was not, quote unquote, academic and was not interested in subjects that didn't have interest for him. And so that's one of the things we teach at CRG, is that, is being authentic to self, being real to self, knowing self, helps you to bring your best self. And so my encouragement is, and we have over the last few shows been mentioning our new e-courses that we have online, and one of them is our values course, which is what do you really value and what motivates self in others. And so in that course, you not only do take our assessment, you understand what are the core behavioral motivational values that are important to you, what are the needs and fears that are linked to that, and then the questions we ask you in the course is, are you living that, and what are some adjustments that you might have to make so that you can feel fulfilled? And this is not from a self-centered point of view, but from a self-honoring point of view, because you are wired at birth in a certain way, and don't fight that. So this is back to playing your strengths. So as always, consider that to take yourself to the next level. As always, we thank you for giving you our most valuable commodity, that's your time. If you like what we're doing, please pass it on, share it, leave a positive comment, and then do let us know about the shows that really impact you. We operate in a vacuum, we don't know. So my encouragement is, if you have a moment, leave a comment, contact us. If you know a guest that would be great, let us know as well. So thank you again for listening to Secrets of Success. Now here's our show with Paul Lafrance. Welcome to the Secrets of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Keis. Well, we have the pleasure of having a TV star on our show today. And, we really got to know him and his company personally, because we actually used his company services for our own personal applications. And we'll kind of figure out what that is as we go through. But I'd like you to welcome Paul Lafrance to our show. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm just glad the audio and everything's working, because I can make wood bark and sit up and dance, but when it comes to tech stuff, I tell you, it's enough to drive me crazy.
Yeah, I get it, Paul. And for those people that are listening that maybe not familiar with you, you had the hit show on HGTV called Decked Out, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So it was Decked Out, which then doubled into Disaster Decks, where I was tormenting poor homeowners who had tried to build their decks themselves, which was always very fun. And then that went into Custom Built and Home to Win, Canada's Handyman. There were 6 television shows in 7 years, so I kept myself pretty busy for sure.
For sure. Well, Paul, thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. But I want to scroll back, and what we do at Secrets of Success is to really get your journey and your story. So, you're in this construction industry, you're in the design industry. What was kind of like, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Ontario, Canada, or were you from somewhere else? Or what was sort of like family of origin times for you?
Well, buckle up, Ken, because we're about to go on a fun little ride. The irony is I was born in Wimbledon, just like literally you could see the tennis courts from the hospital where I was born, just outside of London.
No way, like your accent is really kind of...
Yeah, well, that's the fun part, because the true me is actually a Scotsman. But no one would ever believe me if I had the last name Lafrance and spoke with this true Scottish accent. So that's the real me. But so I'm Scottish Irish. My dad, French Canadian and Irish on my dad's side, and Scottish and British on my mom's side. So there's let's just say that I don't really know who I am half the time. So I came here when I was pretty young. And
and I interrupt my guest quite a bit.
No,
Paul,
you do that. Do it. Interrupt away.
Is that what was your dad doing in the UK?
He was chasing a woman called my mother, and so they ended up having to leave because my dad wasn't able to stay there any longer. So that's why we ended up. My dad's Canadian, but my mom was British, and so we ended up having to come back here right when I was really young, and. As opposed to, my parents having to split. So it was an easy decision for my mom to make. Mm-hmm. So then, so I ended up growing up in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto. And let's just say that, one of the very first things that I had to do, which was a horrible thing growing up, that so many other people have heard of this, I'm sure, is I was forced to do this thing called, what's it called again? School, that's what it is, school. And let's just say that... I could just
see the parents or the teachers, and my wife, by the way, Paul, just saying, crap.
I feel so sorry for them.
Yeah.
Well, because I found out later on in life, at about the age of 35, which I still tell myself was just a few weeks ago, that my wife was like, I think you may have some of the credentials that make up this thing called ADHD. And I was like, oh, whatever. She goes, fill out this little questionnaire. So I filled out this little 15 question questionnaire, and apparently I am the poster child for adult attention deficit disorder. And but that actually ended up becoming something that I talk about quite a bit, because when I was in school, it made a lot of sense as to why, if I was actually sitting in a classroom where the teacher was excited about what they were teaching, then you had my attention. Because most people don't understand, what happens in that particular type of brain. The guy who diagnosed me, first and foremost, said, Paul, you don't have a disorder. You have, the society just has to call it that because it's different, that's what society does. We just have to put things in boxes that aren't, that don't follow our definition of normal. And so he said, if you have to call it a disorder, it'd be more appropriate to call it IDD, which is interest deficit disorder. Because if you're not interested in something, the blood is not flowing in the front portion of your brain. And so, this was great, news for my wife and I, because it meant that
when people said your brain was dead, that was a legitimate comment.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone ever thought my brain was dead. I think they just thought
there's no blood there, Paul. I'm messing with you.
Oh yeah, no, please do. Most people just thought I was from another planet. But the flip side to the to the interest deficit sort of thing, like my wife understanding this was important because now when I didn't pick my clothes up off the floor or put the garbage out, I suddenly wasn't the most selfish person on the face of the planet. However, don't try saying to your wife after you get diagnosed with ADHD that sorry honey, I didn't take the garbage out because I'm just not interested. Unless you want to get hit with a rolling pin. That's not something I would recommend. But the flip side is, if you are interested in something, you are razor sharp focused on it, and typically you will become better at it than most other people. And so that's what I tell parents across the country. I'm like, hey, if you have a child that's been diagnosed with ADHD, and I have a training seminar that I'm putting together on this for down the road, you have to understand this is the greatest gift your child has. They're going to need help in their life for the things they're not good at, but the things they are good at, they're going to help a lot of people. So that's, it'll keep them, they'll be humble, but it will, they'll certainly, you want to guide them in that direction. So, but going back to school, prior to me knowing this, school was hell. It was being forced to sit in a seat all day long and listening to 75% of the time a teacher trying to make me learn something in a way that my brain wasn't gravitating towards. So it was like being in prison for a long period of time. So I feel sorry looking back for the teachers I had.
Well, Paul, I mean, we actually have a course we teach called Why Don't You Teach the Way That I Learn? So even beyond just, I'll call it learning disabilities. I have dyslexia, so you and I can have a party.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that a lot of times the way that teachers teach, and this is not to diss them because I was a school board chair, is not interesting, period.
That's right.
Forget the fact that you had this sort of heightened focus or lack thereof, depending on the topic. It does a disservice. And then, of course, of course, you act out then, right? I was in the principal's office quite a bit. I suspect, did you have some of those tendencies too?
Yeah, it was actually funny. I didn't actually get in trouble as much as you would think. I think I just disengaged. So by the time I hit high school, it morphed into, me ending up now adding into the fact that, the benefit for me, as opposed to so many other kids with a similar type of brain, who are just fast-minded. It's, I prefer to call it people who have a fast mind. You have a fast-minded brain, is that they end up taking on this label that they're stupid or they have a learning disability. And so I was very fortunate that due to my parents that I never had, I knew I was smart, but then entered the arrogance of teenagehood, and I began to, in high school, I just began to question everything. So I would question every single thing that I didn't agree with without reservation. And, this made my connection with, say, people like guidance counselors rather entertaining to watch because I was never afraid, as disinterested I was in most topics. And, I had teachers that were drinking whiskey under their desk because they, hated their lives, which is a whole other topic of me now understanding why teachers become despondent, because they can't help kids because they're under rules of the way they can teach a big group of people, and I won't get into all that. But, all I knew is that guidance counselors were saying to me, all right, Paul, you're 17 years of age, and this is how your life is going to go. This is the path you have to follow. At 17 years, with a face full of acne and a body full of raging hormones, you're going to choose now what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And then you're going to choose to focus on the courses, get the right marks that you need to get into the university that you need to get into so that you can graduate with honors. And when you get out, there's going to be a guy there in a black trench coat waiting to take you to your dream job where you're going to meet your wife. And at that point, you're going to get married, you're going to buy your first house, have 1.5 children, buy your second house, fill that with stuff, and then live happily ever after.
Now, Paul, you don't have an opinion about this process at all, do you?
No, I'm very unopinionated.
Doesn't appear like you do.
Yeah, this is just all off the cuff. But I was like, hey, well, if that's the path of life, then why the heck are you guys all so miserable? So yeah, they didn't really like that too much because I made a point.
Of course. Now, Paul, just so I don't forget, what did your parents do? What were their professions?
So my mom was a registered nurse, so she worked a lot in prisons, and so she was very empathetic person, and dealing with people that other people would ignore, which, or would be considered the dregs of society, and that's where my mom would be. And my dad, who was an equally just really loving person, he was the quintessential sales guy. My dad has probably sold everything under the sun. He, whether he was working for a company, whether he was working for himself, he's just this people person. So I got a good measure of both, from both my parents, and I think the rest from the mothership. But yeah, they were the most tumultuous parents growing up. They still squabble every day now. They live a minute and a half away, and are the great inspiration of my life. And even though when I was a teenager, I think I wanted to ship them both off to an island, separate islands, preferably, never to be heard from again. But it just tells you how life changes.
Oh, man. We should be brothers. I think there were some things that were similar there, too, where my parents were at each other pretty well every day. And they now had their 65th wedding anniversary, if you can believe it.
Yeah, my parents are getting close to that.
And I said, what? Okay, so you get visit all together. yeah, exactly. And both you and I are here. So here you are. Now, did you make it through high school, or did they just say, hey, listen, get out of here? And then what did you do after that, Paul?
So I had 2 credits to complete, 2 non-compulsory credits. And I was in my final year of high school, and I had a teacher named Mr. Milady, who was he was my English teacher, and he was the crankiest human being on the face of the planet. I think he was so old that most of him, he was more machine at that point than man. But he loved to teach English, and I loved English, so I always loved writing. I'm a singer-songwriter, and this is what I did with my spare time when I wasn't at the pool hall trying to escape school. So he recognized this in me. He was like, I remember him saying to me, he said, Paul, you're never going to fit into the system. You just aren't. So he was the guy that gave me that Howard Thurman quote, who was a guy that worked side by side with Martin Luther King, and he said that quote was, don't ask yourself what the world needs, but instead find out what makes you come alive and go and do that thing, because what the world really needs are men and women who have come alive. And that's what Mr. Milady had said to me. And I was like, when the day finally came that, the Gestapo came down the hall to tell me that I can't just go to 1 class out of 4. Because at the time, the only class that I was attending was Mr. Milady's class, and I wasn't attending my other 3 classes. So they were like, you can't do that. Of course, my answer was, well, why not? This is the only one that interests me, so why would I want to go to the other ones? Remember, interest deficit disorder. And so they're like, I'm sorry, no, you have to go. And so Mr. Milady was like, well, we knew this was inevitable. We got to wait for it. He didn't report me. He knew I was doing this for months. And she said, well, go find out. So he said, you can complete. Just go do 2 correspondence courses. You could do like underwater basket weaving and, the mating rituals of the 3-toed sloth and get your final 2 credits and graduate. And I didn't. Because I was mad. And I still talk about this all the time. I didn't graduate on purpose because I felt, for me personally, and this is just for me at the time, and this, I have 4 teenage daughters right now, 4 teenage daughters. I'll just let that ring out.
Welcome, Dad. Yeah, welcome, Dad. Hey, listen, if you want to have a respite over at our place, I guess we'll have a sleepover.
Exactly. And then now take that and add the quarantine factor and, being homebound with a sea of raging hormones. But I digress. The fact that when I left, just leaving that situation, I knew that if I just got the graduation, my life could be easier, and everything in my being, I was like, I had learned at that point that rebelling for the sake of rebelling won't do you any good. Rebellion is not a bad thing. It just has to be focused correctly. I wear a Millennium Falcon and a Rebel Alliance, Star Wars insignia around my neck for a reason, but it's not to rebel for the sake of rebelling. And so I think, I didn't understand what I understood. I didn't understand then what I understand now, but I wasn't doing it just to rebel. I was just like, everything in me was like, I know so many other people, and this is me at 18, who feel like they're idiots, who feel like they're stupid, but yet they're hyper intelligent. They're in a school system that was only really acknowledging one form of learning. And that really upset me because I knew like friends of mine that were just, being literally mentally damaged by a system that was actually with people that meant well. It's not about the people. It's not about some conspiracy. It's just I looked around and I looked at all these people that were being prepared for a future, and the adults in that future world were living in fear. Their whole lives were surrounded by fear. Everyone's waking up every morning terrified that if they don't, that they at any moment they could lose everything that they have unless they do everything to prevent it from happening, which means fear is their motivating factor to get up every day. And then they're welcoming the younger people going, come join us in this world of fear. You prepare yourself, choose where you will go and then join us. And then you're wondering why kids are going, I think I'd rather not. It's like, come into the backyard with the dog with the big teeth. Come join us, Junior. And you're like, I'd rather not actually go in there. And like, no, all the rest of us are in here. You have to come in too. And then you're wondering why kids zap out and play video games for, years on end, because we don't exactly make the adult world look like a fun adventure. We make it look like this is the dredge you have to face every day.
Yeah, welcome to the burden of life. So did you say that you never finished high school?
So
I didn't complete?
Yeah, I don't answer questions quickly, do I? No. No, I didn't. And I still haven't. And I intentionally did because I like the fact, and I'm not advocating, hey, drop out kids and be like me. But for me, the amount of people, so you mentioned dyslexia, here's a great example. Because I speak about this so openly, and that's one of the things I love talking about, is the power of vulnerability and authenticity. Most people would be afraid to say, I didn't graduate high school, because we're immediately afraid of what that does to our status, what that does to us from a social status standpoint, and how that could affect our future. And that's the kind of stuff where I've just, by instinct, have just blown. Every time there's a wall like that's up, I kick it in. And even if I'm like, okay, well, there's no real need to do that this time, I can't help it. I'm sitting down in South Miami Beach, and I'm there with a big company. First few years of the TV show, and I end up talking on stage. And again, I talk about the whole high school thing in this story. And this guy comes up to me afterwards, and he's like in his early 30s, and this guy is a incredibly successful software designer. In fact, I was using his software for my deck. The deck design that you got would have been this guy's design, just to give one degree of separation. This guy designed that software. And he comes up to me, and he's in tears because he says, Paul, how could you so freely just share to the world that you didn't finish high school? And I said, well, the only reason you're asking me that question is because there's something that you're afraid to share with the world. And he looks right at me and he goes, I'm dyslexic. And I looked at him and I'm like, he goes, I've been hiding this for years because I'm so afraid that if anyone found out, they wouldn't trust me. And I said to him, Lee, the opposite is true. If you broadcast that, like, this is what I've done, and here's where I have difficulty. I'm dyslexic. I said, you've now gained people's trust. They're going to trust you more because everybody's got something that we are like not as good as the other people. That doesn't fit into the mold. It binds people together. It creates more trust. And anyone tells you is saying something different is selling something.
Paul, it sounds like you sort of have a platform or position now where you're advocating for education to change. Is that true?
It's one of them. Yeah, I have many platforms because that's also the being a campaigner personality and the Myers-Briggs personality profile. I spent a lot of time, just across the country. I've been working on education reform. I would love to be doing. I would probably do that as one of the two things I did full time. That's why I was talking about the trades so much. I'm advocating. How many people would move into the trades if it didn't have the stigma that's been attached to it since the Industrial Revolution.
So, Paul, I'm going to interrupt you there and give you a stat that you can use that you might or might not already have for your presentation. So, I speak at career development conferences for the last 20 years, almost 10 or 12 times a year. Yeah. And one of the stats I use is, this is a Canadian stat. This podcast goes around the world. But said, what percentage of parents were okay with their kids to go to trade schools? And in Canada, it's 2%.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if you actually ask the parents what percentage would like you to get like a no-name, no useless bachelor's degree for, no application. And by the way, my wife used to work at a university, so I can kind of mess with this.
Good.
Is 63%.
Yep.
So
social status.
Yeah, and then my grade 9 teacher, and this is before, I'm a little bit older than you, Paul, but this is before computers. My grade 9 teacher said I'd never amount to anything because I couldn't read or write. Now I'm a writer. I said, what the heck goes on with that? Well, that was the invention of the computer. This is the invention of the software that Lee did for you to create these amazing designs that you have for your firm as well.
Sure.
So I want to kind of slide into, okay, so you get out of high school. I can't say finish high school. How does this construction world unfold for you?
Oh, you'll get a kick out of that. So after Mr. Merlady's advice to go find out what makes me come alive, well, the first thing on that list was music. So, I'm a singer-songwriter. I've released 2 albums. One I did in 3 days. The other took me 6 years to record. And, but no one ever tied the music to me as the guy on TV because, I didn't allow that. We can circle back to that. But then I did that crazy thing. Again, another crazy thing that people say not to do, and I had friends saying, "Are you crazy? You shouldn't do this." Like, by all means, like don't do this thing. And I said, "No, I'm doing it. I don't care what you say." And I got married at 22 years of age.
Now, where did you meet your wife?
So I met her at church, actually, and she was the very first person that had the audacity to debate with me. Of the opposite sex, and then even more frustrating, she was the first person that would beat me in debates, which really drove me crazy. So I knew right then and there I had to marry her immediately because I knew I would never ever.
Choice.
I knew I would never be bored, and we just had our 24th wedding anniversary, which is crazy.
Congratulations!
And thank you very much. But then we did this other thing, and we got like a mortgage. Have you heard of these things? Yeah. And so I had to get like a job, which again also, remember ADHD brain. This sounds dreadful.
Well, now you're meeting your wife at 22. You must have been doing something at that time.
Yeah, I was working at a bookstore because we were involved. We were involved with doing working a lot, not working, but like volunteering at this church, and we were leading. Always had a passion for young people, working with young people, doing a lot of music, and then but then when we got married, and had this whole mortgage thing because I had a little bit of inheritance money, so we were able to buy a little condo, and so I had to get get a job anywhere. Just to she was doing work for her dad as a law clerk, and I was working in the church bookstore, which is bizarre because this bookstore was at a church where people were coming from all over the world just to go to this one church, which is bizarro, and so it was like the highest selling bookstore in all the country at the time, and I'm there, serving people, selling ridiculous amount, and I'm just like, get me out of here. Like I would end up going and buying chocolate laxatives to put in everybody's coffee just to break the monotony because I was just like, please get me out of here. So then one day. A friend of mine came up and said, well, why don't you, I have a fence and deck company. Why don't you come and try working for me? I don't even think he finished the sentence. So I'm at this point, remember, at this point I'm 23. So I got married at, a few months into being 22. So this is like 10 months later. And now I'm married and I'm just like ready to, drive into a hydro pole because I'm just so bored. He didn't even finish the sentence. He could have said, I have a job. Like, you can work with crocodiles in a sewer. And I would have been like, done, let's go. Where do I sign up? Where's my hazmat suit? So ended up going out very first day on the job. First thing I noticed was the tools on the ground, and they were black and yellow. They were DeWalt tools, which I have, and I have exclusively now. Became an endorser for DeWalt, which is another funny thing. But the reason I love them is because they look like Tonka trucks. And I was like, hey, this reminds me of being a kid. And they made noise, too. It's a double trouble. And at the end of the day, I built something with my hands. Now, you're onto something here now, Copernicus. So, but then 3 months later, after building 7,000 linear feet of the same fence, starting to get bored again. So then the day came that my boss was seeing that I was getting a bit twitchy. And so he calls me into the backyard of a yard that we had already fenced in. and said that he had to build a deck there. And so he was building a very boring deck. And, you know, to understand the story, you have to understand that the three things being of the ADHD brain that I always knew that I was going to be hyper-focused in. One was Lego, because it's Lego, hello. But I spent years and years just building stuff out of Lego. The second thing was music. That's the musician side, because music connects to people. It cuts through it. It can transcend races, languages, you know, you name it. And the third is people. I've always just loved people. I think I'm the only sane person. Everyone else is worth studying. You know, that's the way I look at it. So going back to that situation.
There.
No, yeah, it's a little Tony Stark in me at that point. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. Well, fair enough.
So I walk into this backyard, and remember, these are the three things going in my mind. So number one, this deck just won't do. This deck is boring. This deck's not going to have any connection to these people whatsoever. They need to be in the outside space. You know, I looked at the window of the house where the deck is being built, and I'm picturing me in the classroom wishing I was outside and going, no, this won't do. So I spent the next 10 minutes giving my boss all of my creative ideas that he didn't ask for in one continuous run-on sentence. And at the end of it, he looked at me and he said, Paul, and I heard this quite a lot growing up, Paul, please, for the love of all that is holy, stop talking.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine somebody saying that to you, Paul.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, isn't it?
I know it's hard to
very difficult to put yourself in that position. So I realized that was impossible. And so I quit. And at the age of 23, with no design training, no business training, the common sense of the small pony, I started Paul Lafrance Design, which was cutting edge construction and design at the time. And that's the company. That's the company that we grew and defied every single, you know, law of, you know, I didn't have any business training. So I didn't know, you know, that you're supposed to wear like a golf shirt with like a company insignia on the side. You know, I didn't know that you're supposed to be like friendly but not familiar with your clients, you know. And I didn't know these business rules. So, you know, I would walk up to the door looking exactly like I did on like, you know, like how wearing the same clothes that people would recognize me wearing on TV, because that was me. I was the same guy. You know, looking like I just walked off stage, walking into somebody's house, and within 5 seconds, you know, I would be asking very inappropriate questions like, you know, tell me who you are, tell me your hopes, your dreams, your fears, you know. And what's funny is that the vast majority of people loved that I asked those questions. It was very, very few people that called the police. And
you were only incarcerated for a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were minor, and they realized I was harmless after 6 months in prison. But you know, it was the ability to connect with people helped me with my designing. And then we started, you know, I would spend 6, 8, 10 hours at people's houses. And by the time I left, we had already signed the contract like hours before. And, you know, they're like, you know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, Paul, you do have to go home soon, you know. And I'd be like, oh, right, okay. And this is all true. We started defeating the competition. I didn't even know I was competing. You know, I was like, oh, that's the case. Of course, we weren't making any money because I had no idea how to price anything out, you know. And I'd be like, well, of course we have to put the golden calf with the vomiting lava in the middle of the project. You know, even if they can't afford it, you know, it has to be here because, you know, the project needs to be right. And then my wife would be like, you realize we paid to do this job, right? And I'm like, what? Oh, what's money? You know, my poor wife in the early years, I think she lost a lot of hair there. So I ended up, you know,
so
learning on the fly.
How did you survive those moments where there weren't any margins and you got yourself kind of in that?
We have no idea. I think it was just God's sense of humor keeping us alive. You know, it was just like watching a train that should be flying off the tracks at any moment, but for some reason it stays on. And you know, this led to, you know, me becoming the kind of go-to guy for anybody who wanted something, both interior and exterior, but particularly in the exterior realm, that was out of the box and anything that was creative. And you know, eventually I learned how to, you know, do the business part, mostly because I had my wife, who without her I'd be in a ditch on fire continually. But and then one day I got called in to do this breakfast television spot because they wanted to do this 24-hour miracle makeover. And, somebody won a contest, and I'm downtown in like this rough part of like Toronto and St. Clair Avenue. And it was a curb appeal, and it was 24-hour miracle makeover, and I had to do this front porch, and there were other contractors in as well. And here's this TV spot. Now, remember, I've been on stage in front of 10,000 people as a musician, so being in front of a camera was no different. Going back into school, when I told you I was bored out of my mind, the days that I was most excited was when it was presentation day. I could have been getting a 34% in the class, but for some reason, even though I was bullied and beaten up and I had rough times, a different part of my brain clicked in when it was presentation day, when I had to get up in front of people. There's that whole thing that Jerry Seinfeld makes the joke and says, the people's number one fear in the world is public speaking. And number two is death, which means if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So that part of my brain never developed, where I'm supposed to be afraid to be speaking in front of people. It's bizarre. I've been more nervous having a surprise male massage therapist than I was ever getting up in front of stage in front of 10,000 people. So that's another fun.
Where did that comparison come from? Man, that is like out there.
It's a very, very famous, very famous story. Yeah, my wife setting that one up for me, where it was a big fan of mine who was, you expect when you're getting a massage that the person leaves the room, but this guy stood in there and just stared at me, and I thought that it's a locker room situation. I guess I just have to slowly undress, but I was waiting for him to leave. He didn't leave. So I realized I was giving him a slow striptease because I didn't know what to quite do before I got on the table, and then realized that I was.
We digress. Let's go back to the.
So anyway, we're back.
Let's go back there.
So I'm there. Now remember, so I said, not nervous. So all these other contractors, when Jennifer Valentine from Breakfast Television, the host, shows up, and she's interviewing all these other people. And, these guys are just like deer caught in the headlights. The landscapers they're like, say, tell us what you did today. And they're like, we put in rocks and dirt, and, very riveting television. Mm-hmm. And then there I am in my leather jacket, sitting up against this insane front, a porch that I just built in 12 hours, and I have this like slate diamond inlay built in, which was like my signature thing at the time. And I'm, there looking like James Dean, in my mind. And she's like, well, this guy looks interesting. So she comes over and she interviews me. And at that exact moment in time, and don't tell me that things aren't serendipitous, but a guy by the name of Mike Sheeran, who is the executive producer of all my shows, he ends up turning on Breakfast Television for the first time after he had just gotten off a plane from Afghanistan, where he had made an award-winning documentary about the Canadian troops on the ground in Kandahar. And he's coming back going, I need to rethink my life because I need to do something where maybe I'm not going to risk getting killed. So he turns on Breakfast Television for the very first time, and he sees me. And he's watching, and he's like smiling to himself. He's like, this guy needs his own TV show. And the next day, he contacts my assistant, who was my sister, and a week later, we're having coffee. 2 months later, we're sitting in the HGTV buildings, and they're going, how do you feel about being on television? I'm like, I don't know. How do you feel about Swiss cheese? Like, I'm like, whatever. And then before you know it, we're on the ground on day one filming Decked Out, which they thought was just going to be this nice little, additional ancillary show that would be, because at the time in Home and Garden TV, there was a lot of home and not a lot of garden. So I'm like, I will do this cute little deck show. And then the show ends up breaking every record that Mike Holmes had ever set. And it was like, traveled around the world within a year in countries that are just, you wouldn't even think would be interested in decks. So
just stop for a second there. Traveled around the world for decks to build, to be on a show?
No, sorry. So the show itself, right? So the show ends up was purchased by like the United Kingdom, like South Africa, a number of places in Europe, like Australia, New Zealand, it was sold, and the number one reason that we were given for the success is because people were saying, it just looks like you guys are having fun and you're not taking yourself too seriously. And, people will be coming up to us, and going, what, you group of morons built that? And people have to understand, people on the show that were with me, they weren't casted. They said, you could never cast this show. it'd be like capturing lightning in a bottle, because the boys on the show were all my brother-in-laws.
Yeah,
they're all family.
Yeah, they're just part. Oh, is that right? Okay.
They're all family. They were, and Katie, I had hired anyway. Kate, who was on Homes on Homes, the show, and I had already hired her, my wife and I, to hire her because not because we didn't even have a TV show. She had left Homes Inspection and was coming to work for me, and then the show got approved. So it's not like she was there because of the show, and then so it just happened that people suddenly said, we loved the childlikeness of what you guys were showing. And there was no like host envy, because this is like my family, right? So they're like, we're not going to be kissing your butt because you're the face of the show. And it became this unprecedented like ensemble cast of characters that were legitimately having fun, and I think it was just something that people didn't expect.
Well, as a viewer, my feedback to you, Paul, is that you also did good work. You also did stuff that was unique. And so those of us that are interested in external design, you also brought some ideas and thoughts that were phenomenal. So, I mean, there was all of those things that came together as well. I mean, it is one of the reasons why we reached out to you and asked you to design ours.
Yeah.
Plug put in there. So and
that's funny because of the fact that a lot of people have said to me, a lot of people in the design world have said, the reasons why your designs are so unique is because of the fact that you didn't take design training, that you weren't programmed in any of the ways that have good intentions, but end up having you following what's been already done. And I think that's true. I do think that's true.
Well, as a musician in that creativity side, and we teach personalities, by the way, Paul. That's one of our business things that we do. I've written a book called Why Aren't You More Like Me? And so I get that. You have this sort of, not only do you have sort of this dynamic of attention deficit or interest deficit, you also have this expressive creative side. And so that you were just constantly pushing the limits regardless. You weren't trying to comply.
Correct.
We already know you're a maverick, but that you brought that to design. Yes, you built it to code, but you built it so that it was, even at 23, when you said you're a boss, take a hike, this thing is boring. You already had the client in mind. You already were thinking on their behalf, how could I create that?
People focused.
Excuse me, your show, if I recall, how many seasons was Decked Out?
So Decked Out was 4 seasons, Disaster Deck 3 seasons, Custom Built 2 seasons. Overall, it was over 150 television episodes I did.
So that ended, and so what sort of caused the end of that relationship, or to move away from being on TV with these shows? Because a lot of people, once they're in that space, they don't want to leave it.
Well, I think I scared a lot of people because of being not a controllable entity. So when it came to my own shows, so particularly when it, like Deck Wars, Decked Out, Disaster Decks, and Custom Built, those almost 150 episodes right there were nobody meddled with what I was building, and they knew that they couldn't. But at the same time, I'm very much a team player, so it was a bit of a hard thing for people to figure out, because and it's not trying to knock the machine, right? But the machine wants to be able to control the players in the game, and for me, they knew that if they told me to go left, but it went against any kind of moral high ground or something that I just it would force me to have to compromise something integral to me, that I wouldn't be able to do it. And so if they said, we want you to change this design, or we want you to create some drama over here that's not real, then I would balk against it like crazy. And I think, it's never actually been right, come right out and said it, but it makes it, when I look at who ended up coming in afterwards, and some of the other characters are really great people, but they're all, I think I was one of the last hosts that was actually connected with a production company that wasn't a direct host to the networks themselves, because I think they want to make sure that they can control everything that you do. And so for instance, doing Home to Win, which was the show that came out afterwards, which was this show where we were all together. We would come in, a bunch of HGTV hosts would come in and renovate portions of a house and then give it away. It's really fun and great. I was bawling my eyes out at the end of every one of those 4 seasons. But it was very difficult for me to do that show because number one, I didn't have control over the design, and neither did anybody else. But the thing is, I was the one that I felt was affected the most because of the fact that, when there's only so much budget, somebody can design a room and it can be look pretty, but it may not be exactly what the designer wanted, but he or she would have a lot to say. But if I'm doing a backyard space, because I did indoor spaces too in the show, but I'm doing a backyard space and like your budget is like, $10 in a bag of chips, but design something that is what people will come to expect from Paul Lafrance, and I can't. And, now I'm building something that I would never build. That was really hard for my ego, but in a way, but it was also really good for me too, because I think the ego is the thing that has to die in all of us in order for us to actually become who we're really supposed to be. And so it was good character building, good death march there, just having to endure that. But this is the reason why I decided to make my own show, which didn't happen. It just kind of happened to us. When I say us, I mean my wife and I, Jana. We ended up having a company approach us and say, hey, we just want to follow the puck with you. We want to take the camera and follow you doing what you're doing from the perspective of, we have some companies involved, we want to film you, and we made some connections with some companies that were on a large project, the one that ended up being on the show, and then after about a week realized that unfortunately our commitments were made and we had to take over. Didn't have a choice in the matter. This is about 2 weeks in. So I'm like, okay, well we're going to make a show. I want to make a show the way I want to make a show, because Backyard Revolution is the show that I've always wanted to make. And what makes it different is the fact that, in the 22 minutes that you have to tell a story in a traditional HGTV show, there's only so much you can share. You can't tell the story of the clients. You can't show mistakes that were made. You can't show the real reality. So, for me, reality TV, the term had become, not a real term. It's like almost reality TV or pseudo-reality TV. And so I wanted to do 14 episodes of a large build, so that had a number of, so it shows all the creative elements people would expect from me. There's over 45 different unique products, some of them really revolutionary products that are on Backyard Revolution. But also, it shows all the mistakes. It is the most vulnerable thing I have ever done in my life, because it is taking this belief that, particularly as a builder, as somebody that you're going to hire and, to do work on your house, and show that there's no such thing as a large project that goes off without a hitch. It's how you correct your mistakes. But anyone saying they don't make mistakes, including the biggest of names, is lying, because to err is human. But to explore those mistakes and have the camera right in your face, like for instance, me deciding, like the Peter Pan that I am, that I'm going to do something with the decking on this show that I've always wanted to do for 10 years in a way that is not smart, but will be awesome if I'm able to pull it off, because that's the creative brain. But meanwhile, threw $30,000 into a toilet and demoralized my entire crew, and the camera does not cut. And it's really funny. It's really, really funny, but it's really real. And my anxiety is also really real, and it's picked up on this show. And that's just one example. I also have to do a concert that I put myself in a position where I'm doing a tribute concert for Gord Downey of the Tragically Hip, and I haven't sung in a long time. And as a musician, that's my worst nightmare. To go out on stage, I have nightmares of going out on stage and my voice is shot. That's like a horror to me. So I'm going, well, if I'm going to make this authentic, I'm going to do this concert anyway, and I'm going to bring the camera in to the vocal lesson room, where it is the most humiliating thing that you can do. Let's do this. Let's put the camera right in my face as I'm going goo 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 goo. It's real, and it. What? It is liberating to be flawed. It's liberating to broadcast those flaws, and not let alone to just people in general, but to guys in the industry. I've had more feedback from people that have seen the show that are just like, dude, that was awesome. You know, because guys are kind of programmed, you know, particularly in the trades. You know, it's like it can be very alpha male, beat your chest, you think you're better than me. And I've just never been I've never been trying to be better than anybody. But it's really fun to watch guys, when you know that the other guy's not trying to one-up you and instead is being vulnerable, it's amazing. And I'm sure you've seen this with men. All it takes is one guy going, yeah, I struggle with pornography, or I've done that. Yeah, I've had problems in my marriage, or stuff that guys would never admit. Yeah, I feel like I'm a fraud most of the time. Yeah, I feel like I'm a 12-year-old wrapped in a 29-year-old's body. When people say it, and the other guys in the room look around and go, wow, this is where the guys...
You've given space to it, Paul. You've now sort of opened up where people are thinking it, but they're not doing it. Now, can you believe it, Paul? We're almost done in our time already.
Shocking.
And surely that's not true, right? So before I kind of wrap up with some of your final words of wisdom, is how can people find out more about, your backyard show and Paul Lafrance? So give them the websites that they can find out more about you.
Yeah, so you can watch Backyard Revolution. We've released this in a way that has never been done before. We went around the networks. That's a part that maybe we should do a second part of this podcast where we go into that story, because it's going to help artists around the world. So I self-released this show that I directed and produced. It's backyardrevolutiontv.com, backyardrevolutiontv.com, and you can also reach that through my own website, which is paullafrancedesign.com. And it's a very entertaining show. It is you're gonna laugh. You're gonna be rolling on the floor laughing. You're gonna love what you see, but you're gonna get a lot of giggles out of watching me kind of floundering around, falling on my face. And there's some pretty amazing, touching moments in there too. And I threw myself out of a plane in the middle of it, because I have to.
Why not? Why not? I've done that.
Why not? Right? Why not do that?
Too, so just to scare the crap out of yourself. Now, Paul, with the fact that we're out of time, and I apologize that the time just flew. So thanks for that. What would be, one of the things we like to do on Secrets of Success is for you to share one or two sort of tidbits of wisdom. If people are moving forward in life, I sense your passion around having kids find a career direction that they're passionate about, not what the institutions want them to do. What would be one or two things that you would say to the audience members as individuals or business owners that would encourage them, or thoughts of wisdom from you as closing remarks?
I mean, there's a number that I can pick from, but because I'm so wise, there's another narcissistic moment.
Of course.
I think the one that stands out to me the most is it's really important to understand the pulse of the populace, right? So, the way Shakespeare talks about the mob, the world in general, to understand that right now, and this is like a pre-COVID thing, but people are more desperate for true authenticity than they ever have. Like we're living in the Facebook generation where it's like everyone, I have 5,000 Facebook friends, but we're all very close. Like it's all nonsense. And the power of being truly authentic and vulnerable and leading with the things that you, like not being afraid of the things that you are flawed in. I don't even think that our weaknesses are indeed weaknesses. I think insecurity can be our greatest strength. Insecurity shows the world that you are vulnerable and you care about what people think about what you create. And as business owners, as parents, I think being truly vulnerable, allowing yourself your flaws and your the things that you've tried to hide, letting those be seen, putting your emotions on your sleeve. I know it's a lot more to expound on, but I dare you. Because watch what happens in your relationships, the relationships that count in your life, when you dare to be vulnerable, and watch the fruit of it. Watch what happens. Watch what happens in other people around you. Watch how you impact people by doing that. And watch how the very things that you thought that you'd be afraid of if you ever did, that would happen to you, don't actually happen. In fact, it's the opposite. That would be the one thing I would say.
Well, Paul, thank you for that, and thank you for spending the time and hanging out with us on the show.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. I can do this all day. Like Captain America.
Really? And then the thought never occurred to me. So, Paul, stay with us. But Secrets of Success listeners, you've been listening to Paul Lafrance. Go to backyardrevolutiontv.com and watch his new show that he has self-released. And you could go online and see his legacy shows around Decked Out and some of those other shows that he had on HGTV. And my encouragement is what Paul had said, is that being authentic to self, as far as what your passion, what your purpose is, that's what we do here at CRG, is that the greatest gift you can give to the world is to be yourself and to be in that zone of high energy. So thank you as always for giving us your most valuable commodity, and that's your time. And if you like what we're doing, please share, pass it on, leave a positive comment on whatever platform you're listening to. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Keis.
Thanks for exploring the secrets of success with us. If you want to keep the momentum going, log on to crgleader.com. Scroll to the bottom and sign up for our inspirational emails. You can also take your success to the next level by following us on Facebook and Twitter and connecting with Ken on LinkedIn. We hope you have a great week and look forward to you joining us next time for the Secrets of Success podcast with Dr. Ken Keis.